You're listening to Funding Rural, a show where we explore how philanthropy can better serve rural and indigenous communities. I'm Erin Borla with the Roundhouse Foundation, based in Sisters, Oregon. I want to take a moment and give you all a heads up that in this episode, we're going to be talking about mental health challenges and suicide. If you or someone you love has struggled with suicidal thoughts, please know you can always call 988. It's a helpline for those in mental health crisis. John Cornelius, my guest today, actually has that number, 988, tattooed on his arm and plastered all over his car. He's a peer support and suicide prevention specialist and a mental health educator who's worked with young people, veterans, faith groups, the unhoused, and so many others. Until very recently, John was with FCC Behavioral Health in Missouri, where he was working with the Southeast Missouri faith community through a firearm suicide prevention grant. That grant was funded through the Missouri Institute for Mental Health and funded by the Missouri Foundation for Health. John was raised on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. He went on to serve in the U.S. Army and was stationed in Korea and Iraq. Over the years, he's been unhoused and struggled with addiction. He's also attempted suicide. He told me his faith helped him overcome these challenges in his life and also guides his work helping others.
I spent time in church as a youth leader, a faith-based recovery leader, and a Sunday school teacher for over the span of a decade. So it really put me in alignment with the faith community aspect of the firearm suicide prevention grant. We had a lot of success. Within the first 6 months, we partnered with our first couple of churches on hosting trainings, QPR, Conversations for Suicide Safer Homes. And we were a little surprised at the way they embraced it. We had a few no's right off the bat. Didn't stop us. And I really had to adjust my schedule because churches don't maintain normal business hours. And just the type of environment you're going into, there's no pastor worth their mettle that's going to let a stranger come and teach their people. So we had to navigate how to integrate, right? And ultimately, I ended up working on Sundays, late on Wednesday evenings, attending community events on weekends and at odd times during the week because that's when the churches were doing it. And it really increased the success rate of that integration process because through that integration and, being a believer, understanding and being able to relate to scripture and those principles, and ultimately coming at it from a Jesus approach where he just said, love your neighbor as yourself.
It's such an interesting, I love the model because it is meeting people where they are and where they need support. And so many communities, especially rural and remote places, are based around their faith community. And that's their community center. So
Right.
Finding those access points and a trusted human that understands is such a gift.
Right. And, it's in alignment. And that was one of the first barriers was how do we talk to so many different denominations that have different views on the same point? And it ultimately led us to the point, right? Jesus. They all believe in Jesus. So if we look at it, people in mental health crisis the way Jesus looked at people in crisis and kind of aim at that, we're all going in the same direction anyway. And mental health and faith is more hand in glove than previously thought.
Yeah. You've shared with me in the past when you first started making some of those calls, one pastor said something pretty profound to you that sort of changed how you approached things.
Right. So in the first initial phone call phase of the outreach, I did get a hold of a pastor and he was very polite. He was very nice. He let me talk and explain what we were doing. And he said, I'm sure there's going to be some churches out there that are going to like what you're doing and get on board. He said, but I'm here to deal with spiritual needs. And it really did shape how we looked at it and how is it not a spiritual need to keep someone alive?
Yeah.
And that really shaped our outreach and the conversation, and ultimately started pointing us, you know, to Jesus himself.
What brought you to the work?
Uh, I'm a two-time suicide attempt survivor. Once when I was at the peak of my addiction with a self-induced meth overdose. Um, I lived, and that's what started this journey. And then during another, I say relapse, I didn't use meth, but I was still entertaining other substances, and I began abusing my medication. And I became suicidal again, and I made a second attempt a few years ago. And I didn't apply for the suicide prevention job with FCC. I was already working for them, and I'm just very open about my story and, you know, how my faith got me where I am, and being around great people and a supportive environment has, you know, that's what fuels me. And I applied for a different job because I was trying to get away from client contact, because I could see in myself that I was going down that road again. And I said, well, maybe if I do this and I'm not dealing with that anymore, I'll be okay. And when I did, I applied for a liaison job for youth mental health because my daughter was going through some issues herself, and I was really frustrated with how there was almost no resources for her. And I figured I could do something about it that way. And when I did, my supervisor's supervisor said, "Hey, why'd you do that? Is everything okay with the team? You know, is it something we can work on?" And I said, "No, it's just this."
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "We have this suicide prevention job that we think you'd be really good at."
Yeah.
And I applied, and here I am. And which ultimately led to us meeting at the gathering in St. Louis. And it's been one heck of a ride. We've partnered, at least in the faith-based aspect. The construction and manufacturing aspect is great. My partner Kate Brinkley is heading up that side of it, and she's had a lot of success with several of the factories we have here in town. We're going to expand to some more manufacturing type places in surrounding counties. And she's phenomenal. I mean, I always tell people, and I'll tell people until it's that grant is over. When I showed up, I did something, and I did it for a while, and people liked it. And then Kate showed up, and it turned into what it is today. And I will tell people that the whole way. Uh, but the construction side is just on fire right now. The faith based really has come along. We've partnered with over a dozen churches throughout the 2.5 years. We have pastors that want to become QPR instructors, or at least designate a lived experience person in their congregation to become a instructor. So I mean, the groundwork is already laid to just keep doing it now, at least in those counties. And the counties around there can look at what they're doing and how it's impacting their community a year from now.
Yeah. That grant, just so we have some sort of level setting, at Missouri Foundation for Health, and there was another partner.
Missouri Institute for Mental Health is the firearm suicide prevention grant has 8 agencies scattered across Missouri, all under one grant, approaching groups as designated by their geographical locations. Like we have agricultural up north of St. Louis, you know, urban first responders in St. Louis. Down here, it's primarily agricultural and the manufacturing and the faith based. So we're one agency is doing, trying to integrate in schools. So it was a really try everything kind of grant and see what
Yeah.
works. And all of the agencies participating have had amazing success in their groups that they've approached. And, you know, not without individual and unique barriers to each group, but when we come together and we start talking about what we're doing, and it just makes the process so much faster and efficient because we have exposure to all 8 agencies that are together on it. And as far as FCC's partnership with Missouri Institute of Mental Health, was a tag team effort on applying for the grant, where Missouri Institute of Mental Health oversees the functionality of the grant, and FCC implements the groundwork with coaching to the whole grant provided by Open Fields Consulting out of Greenville, South Carolina.
It's such a cool model. And I know I don't want to get into the weeds here today about how it works, but I think what I appreciated was there was a big planning period that was funded up front. So you
Yes.
mentioned like we didn't really know how to do it. We were just going to try. And
Right.
so funding that planning period, having these 8 different agencies across the state, and then the ability to convene has been such an opportunity. I mean, that's how you and I met. That's how we got to see all those different partners that came
Right.
together.
Right. Absolutely. And I've been saying it since I came on board: one team, one fight. It doesn't matter what neighborhood you're in. If we're
Yeah.
all aiming at the same target, we could go help each other. And that
Yeah.
just builds that. And as a peer specialist, I'm all about support network, right? You got to have that safety net. And this is just doing that on a larger scale.
Yeah. It's such a cool model. And I just, we'll definitely have information available. So folks that have questions about how that got funded, because that's essentially what the podcast is about, is how do we find grant models that work in different places, and why is rural important? You didn't grow up in Missouri.
No, I was born here in Poplar Bluff, but I grew up on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, and both names mean tree on a hill. And so I've thought about what that means as I've gotten older, and what does it mean to be a tree on a hill, right? You got to work twice as hard to get the same water, and you're taking the beating that the trees in the valley don't feel.
Hmm.
And
That is profound, my friend.
right. So I grew up on the reservation as a biracial resident, and due to some historical factors that we don't need to get into at this time, I will just say that it was a violent upbringing. I learned I had to fight. I was different. I didn't understand why I was different when it started. I had to ask my dad because they called me Washichu. And when my dad picked me up, I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "Who called you that?" And I said, "Those boys." And he said, "Well, the traditional meaning says someone who takes the best for themselves." And I said, "But Dad, I didn't steal anything." And he said, "Well, today it means white boy."
Hmm.
And I was like, "But I'm just like them."
Yeah.
I didn't know the difference. And, but I quickly learned. And I've, the kind of unofficial motto of my life is walking in two worlds.
Hmm.
I grew up there in a I would say, semi-cultural environment. Um, my grandfather spoke Oneida to me until he died when I was 6. It was my first language. When I got to kindergarten at 5 years old, they were trying to teach me in English and Lakota, and I struggled a lot. And later in life, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and they just didn't know what to call that back then. I was a bad kid. And it exposed me to a culture that's timeless, that despite history is still very much alive, and a connection to the earth that to me can't be denied. But growing up in that very impoverished environment, you're dealing with, I didn't have many choices as a homeless high school student. There were gangs, there were drugs, there were, reckless behavior, and a lot of suicide, including one of my friends when I was a sophomore. I told someone once I went to my first suicide funeral for a kid my age when I was in 6th grade, and I lost count by the time I was a senior. And that's just the environment. And, again, many historical factors that we don't have to get into today, but that is the reality. And despite that reality, there is also another reality, because two things can be true at the same time. The place is beautiful, and it's filled with amazing people with amazing stories that are artists and gardeners and healers and singers and dancers. And that's how they still survive, because we don't forget who we are.
Yeah.
And I left there to join the Army, and I served for 7.5 years. My first overseas tour was in Korea. I served on the DMZ. I was about 20 miles away. It's kind of scary when they tell you when you get there that the first 25 miles south of the border are going to be obliterated with artillery for 72 hours before they ever move a tank. And you realize, wow, I'm 5 miles inside that maximum range. Um, 9/11 happened when I was there. I was 10,000 miles in the other direction when it happened, and it altered the course of my life. Uh, I did end up ultimately serving in Iraq in 2005, and I got out after that and succumbed to the life of many veterans, homeless, jobless, hopeless, addicted, for several years, about half a decade, pretty significantly. And then I started my recovery journey, which ultimately brings me here with you.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your story. And I know that it fuels you today, as those challenges are unimaginable. But I appreciate you sharing.
Thank you for
Uh,
the space.
yes, I think it's so. I want to talk about a variety of things because I think as we look at suicide rates across the country, there are certain groups that are higher. And part of that is as we talk about native cultures, as we talk about life on reservations, that's impacted, and those numbers are high. What are those? I know that we had talked before about a conference you were at that shared some slides. Can you tell me that story?
Right. I attended a conference, and it was a breakdown of a study they had done across a variety of groups. And um, we got to the slide deck section where they show the graphs and populations over time. Each group had a pretty significant amount of time. I would say 3-4 minutes of explanation as to why those numbers look the way they do. And when it came to the Native American slide at the end, there was a black line and it said US national average, and a red line above it that said Native American tribal territory reservations. And the presenter said, "We attribute these numbers to addiction," and changed the slide. And so when the Q&A came around, I raised my hand and I said, "Excuse me, I grew up on the Pine Ridge Reservation," gave a very abbreviated history. And I said, "If we all know why those are the highest numbers, or at least where the highest numbers are, why are there no resources in those communities?" And she just looked at me and said, "I don't know." And my life hasn't been the same after that. Not as a human, not as a professional. And I've always been the type to see what needs to be done and just grab the shovel.
Yeah. And when you don't know where to use the shovel, it becomes difficult because you need to use the shovel everywhere, right?
And ultimately led to a trip I took recently where I started in New York and went down through DC, Fort Bragg, Greenville. I stopped to see the Open Fields team. They're amazing people down there. And they were so hospitable and showed me around. It was amazing. Ultimately went up through Nashville back here and presented at the Missouri Suicide Prevention Conference. My breakout session was called Suicide Prevention and Faith, semicolon, a servant's journey. Followed up by a trip back to the reservation where I found out some pretty significant family history and just met some really good people who had experienced, the very real impacts of the widespreadness of suicide in the community. I mean, it's talked about like it's just another part of life.
Hmm.
It hits hard, but there's no choice but to move on. And it really opened my eyes to, my calling and my journey, and, what can John do? And it led me to where we are today with this transition in my
Mhm.
life and what I'm doing and where I'm going. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to come and share.
Yeah. Well, and I want to touch on that for sure and where you're headed next. But before we get there, I think the interesting connection between rural and indigenous communities and veterans is their relationship to firearms. And your grant is around firearm suicide prevention, firearm injury prevention, firearm harm prevention.
Right.
Um, it's a different relationship than I think people think about when they think about, oh, we got to talk about gun violence.
Well, let's start with the facts that you can get on CDC, FBI, any agency that tracks gun violence on a national level right now, and see that firearm suicide kills 10 to 12,000 more people every year than firearm homicide and home invasion combined. So we're having the wrong conversation to begin with when it comes to gun violence. We should be starting with firearm suicide.
I am in 1,000% agreement. I think the most important thing that's interesting is that those numbers are tracked aligned. They
Yes.
are tracked the same.
Mhm.
Firearm death, regardless of intent, is tracked the same.
Right.
And so when we say gun violence as a national phrase, the general population believes it looks like one thing:
Right.
homicide.
Right. And that is a general mentality right here in Missouri, and until I present that, over 65% of the suicides as a whole in Missouri are firearm related. And then there's a certain percentage of the accident, what is deemed accidental or unintentional.
Mhm.
And so what the firearm suicide prevention grant was doing in Missouri is pushing safe storage during a mental health crisis, right? So part of what we do is we say, yes, these are the factors that lead to, this is how to interact with somebody that's there, and this is how to keep them safe in that time. And here's some strategies. What does that look like? A gun box with a key, give the key to somebody else, a gun safe with a biometric lock, put somebody else's thumbprint on it for a month. you know do these things to, number one, alleviate and destigmatize the they're coming after my guns mentality, because that's not the case. We're talking about keeping people and their families safe, because research has shown time and again that people that are feeling suicidal make decisions very fast. And so the counter to that is time and distance, right? What can we do to keep the time and make that time and distance and give somebody time to think? And we partnered with a few gun stores in the community to, one of them to provide us with um, safe boxes that we can take to trainings. We can use them as door prizes. We can hand them out to FCC clients in crisis mode that come through our agency referral process. Um, we're talking about hosting a firearm safety, safe storage class at a few of these gun stores for the general public to come and just learn how to use the safety measures, right? This is how you install a gun lock on a semi automatic. This is how you install it on a revolver. This is how you install it on a rifle of this
Mhm.
style and that style, so on and so forth. Because having the lock and knowing how to safely install it on that firearm are two things.
Yeah.
Because somebody, and as a firearm instructor, I was a NRA pistol instructor for a few years. I actually taught the CCW class for Missouri for a number of years and certified several people. Um, as a firearms instructor, having that class available, all that training, the military, I was a law enforcement officer for a few years, I was a firearms instructor. None of those trainings spoke about suicide or mental health crisis safety measures. None. And so that's kind of some more fuel to the passion for this, and just being able to provide a resource for people to go and learn how to handle that firearm in a safe way, because the instructor mentality is, if you don't know what you're doing with it, you're even more dangerous.
Well, I think it's important too, so whomever might be listening, that the relationship to firearms in Native communities and rural places, in with veteran groups, with law enforcement officers, is just, it's different than I think in other places.
Right. So there's certain mentalities, depending on geographical location and whatnot. Like here in Missouri, we're a pro 2A state. We're an open carry state. It's a very gun friendly environment as far as ownership. On the reservation and in many rural communities, people hunt a lot.
Yeah.
On the reservation, people still hunt to eat, and that's the only reason they hunt. They don't chase antlers. They're trying to have dinner. But so firearms at whatever level in the community you're in, as far as firearm ownership and integration, again, some research shows that just having the firearm creates the risk for firearm suicide. So, how do we manage them safely in the home in a good way and still allow people to use them for whatever means they have them for? And it does impact, especially speaking on experience as a young man on the reservation. We always said it comes in threes. If there's one, there'll be two more, and they'll be similar and usually close to the first one. And I can recall that ringing true a lot of the times. They would use a similar method or the same method. So it very much, I think, impacts the ripples that it touches afterwards, as far as that, from what I saw as a young man. And in today's society, I think I feel like it's a disconnection from people, right? Because of whatever reason, you can have 5 people in a room together and they're all on their phone. And, that creates a sense of isolation in and of itself. And that's where we find hopelessness. And that is the thing. People have been asking me for years, is it homelessness? Is it race? Is it disparity of this type or another? Everybody looking down at people at what Jesus would refer to as the least of these. We look at all those groups of people and say, oh, well, this is causing suicidal behavior, and that's causing, look at the addiction, look at the homelessness, look at the joblessness. When at least in Missouri, the primary age group for suicide is 45 to 65 white males. We're talking about business owners. We're talking about farm owners. We're talking about retirees that, why are they the highest group? They're not homeless. They're not hungry. Hopefully, as far as looking at a broad scope of it.
Yeah.
But hopelessness will touch everybody. It doesn't matter what neighborhood you grew up in. It doesn't matter what tax bracket you live in. It doesn't matter who you call God. Hopelessness will find you. And we need to have a community effort support network when it does.
Yeah. And that is what's leading to your next journey.
Right.
Can I hear about it?
Yes. Oh, I'm nervous. I'm so nervous, but I'm excited. It's like the first time I jumped out of an airplane for the Army. I trust the equipment. Trust the
You better
equipment.
trust the
That's
equipment
all
on
you
that.
have. That's all you have. Trust the equipment and your training. Trust your training. Um, and so that's what I'm doing, at least in this new transition in life. And as it told you before, I went to the reservation and I spoke to some people in the community, and they're really eager to get started doing something. And so this new direction is going to look a lot different for me. I'm going to begin taking a trip up there every month. At least right now, I can fund it myself. I can go up for a couple of days a month and start helping them shape what it might look like. Uh, I've written a few grant proposals to start peer support grassroots programs and just bring the training to the people already in the community. Um, I showed one of those to a buddy of mine, and he didn't say it was bad. So I'm hopeful. And he gave me some guidance on how to shape it along a little more, and sent it back to me. And so I say I'm 6'4". I walk amongst giants. You know, I asked for help, and people were like, "Okay, let's go." And it really gave me the confidence to take this step. My supervisor was like, if you don't give a 2-week notice, you can't come back, right? And I said, I understand my decision. Thank you for everything you've done for me. And oh yeah, surprise! I'm resigning from my job with the firearm suicide prevention grant, effective tomorrow, to go in this new direction to bring training and support right to the reservation in a small community called Allen. It's right on the border of the reservation. My ina, Honka style. Honka is a Lakota way of adoption. And ina is mother. My friend and brother Jeremy's mom has been really good to me throughout my life, and she's a community leader there. She runs the youth center. Her, a guy named Doc, and a man named Dario are both involved in the school there. Doc is the president of the school board, and Dario is one of the most recent loss survivors. They lost their son 2 years ago. And we're going to work on getting a safety and education, mental health, wellness week set up for when the kids come back to school in September, just to kick things off.
Nice. Yeah, that's exciting. I'm so happy for you. I think finding your calling and supporting communities that maybe feel left behind.
Right. And just being so grateful for what all the opportunities I've had through FCC and the firearm suicide prevention grant, and all the partners and opportunities I had to come share what we were doing here in Missouri, or what I was doing with them at the time. And it was such an amazing journey from beginning to at this point for me, and so foundational in who I am right now talking to you.
Yeah. All those things add together, right? And I think,
Right.
going back to saying sometimes decisions are made that are final very
Right.
quickly. But if you look and listen to everybody's story, they lead to these next things and these great things. And there's challenges in between. Every road has its bumps and boulders. But I'm
Absolutely.
glad you're here today.
I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad you're here. And I
Oh,
have this little catchphrase I say in some of my poems that I write. I've been down this road before. It's best to walk with a friend.
mm. Before we close out, you have a Hope Mobile.
The Hope Mobile.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Just, I want to
Yes.
make sure that we have people that know what you're up to and all the
Right.
things that you're doing. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about 988, just in case there's folks that don't know what that is.
I'm all about good things and shouting as loud as I can when I find something really good. Like when you're a kid and you find that really awesome rock and you just want to show everyone. 988 is my rock. I have a 2014 Mustang GT. It's got to have it green. It's really loud. It's fast. Everyone looks at it. I put the 988 logo all over the back window of it and started driving it around to some outreach events, and ended up at a conference with at the Construction Working Minds Summit. And Dr. Sally posted and said, John and his Hope Mobile. And it stuck. So I drive around as a mobile outreach. I'd like to do car shows and church events and, public gatherings. If anybody needs 988 resources, suicide prevention, peer support resources, I'm really good at pulling up the Google and finding local resources if I'm in some place that I'm unfamiliar with. Just because, you work in the field, you know which words to put in. So, and most people just say mental health and get 10,000 results. So I like to help people find the resources where they are. And so it's the 988 Hope Mobile. We're just rolling all over the country, spreading hope 1 mile at a time, one burnout at a time.
And as we close out, there's a Lakota word that you've used before about how you think about the world. Would you mind sharing that?
Yes. Mitakuye Oyasin in Lakota means we're all related in a sacred hoop. Creator, Mother Earth, all of the plants and animals that give us life, and humans. And that's really the foundation of my approach to this work. From the Lakota point of view, if it hurts one, it hurts all. And, it's about balance and only taking what you need to survive. And if you see somebody in need and you give. For a Lakota, Akichita is the highest honor we could achieve in life. And a modern English translation would say warrior or soldier. But a Lakota elder, Milo Yellowhair, said it like this: first to fight, last to eat. This is what it means to be a Kichita, a servant to the Oyate, or the people.
This was the heavy episode. Thanks for sticking with us through all of it. I think John's story is so powerful. As a reminder, if you or someone you know is struggling with suicidal thoughts or mental health challenges, please call 988. Know that there is hope. Please call 988. I think the story that John shared, it's so fascinating because oftentimes in philanthropy, we're like, we're going to fund the organization that's going to do the work. But sometimes it's about funding the people and following the people that know where the connections are. And while his is a story of challenges and of sacrifice, it's also a story of hope and building back and supporting community. As funders, as we think about opportunities to support work that's hard, work like firearm suicide prevention, there are some really great examples out there. And I do want to call out Missouri Foundation for Health and their work that they've done across the state of Missouri with this grant. There was a huge investment in planning time. So organizations and people coming together didn't necessarily need to know exactly what they were going to do, but they had an idea. And then they were given that time and funded through that time to come up with the concept collectively and partner with others and convene and discuss these issues. to really come up with a wonderful and developed plan that would support their community on this really tough issue. Topics like suicide prevention and firearms are big, heavy, meaty, scary topics that can be polarizing. And sometimes as philanthropists, we step away from those topics because they're really hard. And when we think about suicide prevention, we often only think about the prevention side. How do we stop that really impulsive act? But I think there's more to that story. How do we provide resources for hope beyond the prevention? What's next? What opens the door to tomorrow? And I hope collectively we all work through finding ways to support one another in community. Head over to fundingrural.com. We'll link to John's TikTok, where you can see his poetry, his music, his adventures in the Hope Mobile, as well as follow along on this new journey with him on the Pine Ridge Reservation. Thanks so much for listening.